I was sitting in my apartment staring at my laptop screen when my phone buzzed with a text from my cousin asking if I could help him move some equipment from a warehouse in rural Pennsylvania to his place in Ohio. It was a Tuesday evening in early November, and the weather forecast was predicting heavy rain throughout the night. He offered to pay me $300 for the drive, which seemed reasonable enough for a long haul that would take me about 4 hours. I had been doing freelance delivery and transport work for the past 2 years, picking up gigs whenever I needed extra cash. Most of the work was straightforward and uneventful. You show up, pick up whatever needs moving, and drive it to the destination. This job felt like it should be simple enough, just a longer drive than usual. I confirmed with my cousin that I would leave around 8 o'clock that evening, which would get me to the warehouse by 9:30. The rain had already started by the time I grabbed my keys and headed to my truck. The roads were slick, and visibility was getting worse as darkness fell. I had made this general route before, so I knew the way relatively well. What I did not anticipate was how isolated the final stretch would become. When I pulled up to the warehouse at 9:45, the building was barely visible through the heavy rain. It was an old concrete structure sitting about 2 miles off the main highway, surrounded by empty fields and dense woods. The parking lot had only 2 other vehicles, and no one seemed to be around. I sat in my truck for a moment, watching the rain hammer against my windshield, wondering if anyone was even working this late. Then my cousin stepped out from the side of the building, waving me over. He looked tired, drenched from the rain. I grabbed an umbrella and jogged over to meet him. He explained that he needed me to load 4 large metal storage containers filled with equipment and parts for his workshop renovation project. Each container was heavy, and it took both of us about 40 minutes to carefully load them into the bed of my truck and secure them with bungee cords. The rain continued to pour the entire time we worked. By the time we finished, both of us were soaked through. My cousin handed me an envelope with $300 in cash and reminded me to drive carefully. He said the roads would be worse as I headed west, especially once I got past the industrial area and into the farmland. I thanked him, climbed back into my truck, and pointed myself toward the highway. The drive westward was straightforward for the first hour. I stayed on the main highway, passing through small towns and industrial zones. Traffic was light because of the weather, and most sensible people had stayed off the roads. But as I crossed the state line and pushed further into the rural farming region, everything changed. The highway gradually became quieter. The towns disappeared, replaced by long stretches of nothing but fields, fences, and occasional farmhouses set far back from the road. The rain showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it got worse. My windshield wipers could barely keep pace with the downpour. At one point, I passed a sign indicating I was entering an area known for agricultural production. The landscape transformed. What had been sparse became completely desolate. I was now driving through farmland that seemed to stretch on forever in every direction. The road itself became narrower and less maintained. I had not seen another vehicle for nearly 30 minutes. The GPS on my dashboard showed I still had about 90 minutes to go. That was when I noticed the turnoff. My cousin had mentioned I might need to take a back road to shorten the drive by about 20 minutes, depending on road conditions. The GPS was offering me a route that would take me through a rural area rather than continuing on the longer highway. The sign pointed down a county road that looked barely wide enough for 2 vehicles to pass. I hesitated for only a moment before turning onto it. The county road was in bad condition. Potholes filled with water made the drive feel treacherous. My truck splashed through them, and I had to slow down significantly to avoid damaging my suspension. The landscape here was different. Instead of open fields, there were dense patches of woods on both sides of the road. Trees loomed overhead, their branches sometimes hanging so low that they nearly touched the top of my truck. The rain seemed even heavier here, as if the forest was channeling it all down onto the road. I had not seen any lights from houses or farms for the past 15 minutes. No other vehicles had passed me in either direction. The road twisted and turned through the darkness in ways that felt unpredictable. I kept checking my GPS to make sure I was still going the right way. The screen showed I was making progress, but something about this stretch of road was affecting me in a way I could not quite explain. My shoulders felt tense. The sound of the rain on my roof and the constant swishing of my wipers created a monotonous rhythm that made me feel almost hypnotized. I turned up the volume on the radio, more for company than anything else. The signal was weak out here, and the station I was listening to kept cutting out, replaced by static. I switched to another station, and then another, but the result was the same. Eventually, I just turned it off. The silence that followed felt worse than the noise had been. About 20 minutes into the county road, I saw a flash of lights ahead. At first, I thought it might be another vehicle coming toward me, but as I got closer, I realized it was a warning light indicating road construction. The road ahead was partially blocked. A sign read "Road closed ahead. Detour." An arrow pointed to a dirt road on my left that cut through the farmland. I cursed under my breath. This was not on my GPS. The GPS was still insisting I continue straight, but that option was no longer available. The construction site looked abandoned in the rain, with no workers or vehicles visible. I had no choice but to take the detour. The dirt road was barely more than a path. My truck bounced and lurched over the uneven surface. Mud splashed up against the sides of my vehicle. I was now driving through what looked like active farmland, the road cutting directly through large fields of harvested crops and fallow land. The darkness here was absolute. My headlights cut a narrow tunnel through the rain and the night, but beyond that tunnel there was nothing but black. I could hear the tires crunching on the wet dirt and stones. My headlights reflected off puddles that seemed to be getting deeper and more frequent. I was starting to wonder if I had made a serious mistake taking this road at all. My phone had lost signal about 10 minutes ago. When I checked it, all I saw was the word "searching" in the top corner. The GPS was still working because it did not rely on cell signal. But the knowledge that I had no way to call for help if something went wrong suddenly felt very real and very pressing. The dirt road finally ended at a small cluster of buildings that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. There was a house, a barn, and what looked like an old storage shed, all arranged in a rough circle around a muddy clearing. The house was dark except for a single light on the front porch. The barn doors were chained shut. The whole scene had the appearance of a property that had not been properly maintained in years. Boards covered some of the barn windows. The house had peeling paint and a sagging roof. Weeds grew up around the foundation. My GPS indicated this was where the detour road connected back to the main county road, about a mile away. I could see the county road stretching out beyond the property. I was about to continue past the house when my phone suddenly came back to life with a series of rapid pings. Messages and notifications flooded in. The GPS recalibrated. I was back online. In my relief at getting signal again, I did not pay much attention to the house. I kept driving, splashing through the mud, and within another minute, the property had disappeared behind me into the darkness. The county road resumed, and the landscape opened up again into fields. I was probably only 30 or 40 minutes away from my cousin's place now. I figured the worst of the drive was behind me. I could not have been more wrong. I had been driving on the county road for about 15 minutes when I first noticed the headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought nothing of it. Another vehicle on the road was actually a relief after the long stretch of isolation. But as the minutes passed, the vehicle behind me did not fall back or turn off onto another road. It stayed directly behind me, maintaining the same distance. The headlights were too bright, as if the driver had their high beams on. I tried to get a better look by adjusting my rearview mirror, but I could not make out the vehicle itself, only the lights. I sped up slightly, thinking the driver might be impatient and wanted to pass. The vehicle sped up too, maintaining the gap. I slowed down. The vehicle slowed down. My heart started to race. This was not just someone driving behind me. This felt intentional. The road here was relatively straight, stretching out through farmland with few places to turn off. I was looking desperately for another road, another property, anything that might represent help or an escape. The vehicle continued to follow me. I decided to test a theory. I took a sharp right turn onto a gravel road that led toward a distant farmhouse. The vehicle behind me also turned. That was when the fear became real and immediate. This was not coincidence. Someone was following me deliberately. I could feel my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Sweat was forming on my palms despite the cold night. The farmhouse ahead was dark, no lights on anywhere. The gravel road was leading me further away from the county road with each passing second. I could not keep going in this direction. I would just be trapping myself deeper into isolation. I made a split-second decision. I slammed on the brakes and threw my truck into reverse, backing up rapidly toward the county road. In my rearview mirror, I could see the headlights stop. The other vehicle was no longer moving. For a moment, I thought maybe the driver had realized I had noticed them and decided to abandon whatever they were planning. I continued backing up until I hit the county road again. Then I shifted into drive and accelerated as hard as I safely could on the wet pavement. The headlights did not reappear behind me. I drove for 10 more minutes at a speed I would normally have considered reckless in these conditions, constantly checking my mirrors, expecting to see those lights again. They never came. When I finally reached my cousin's place just outside the city limits, I was shaking. My cousin came out to help me unload the containers, and he immediately asked if something was wrong. I told him about the entire experience, from the detour to the house to the vehicle that had followed me. He listened carefully, then told me something that made my blood run cold. He said that property I had passed on the detour, the one with the dark house and the single porch light, had been the scene of a break-in and attempted abduction 3 months earlier. A woman had been home alone when someone tried to force their way inside. She had managed to lock herself in a bedroom and call the police. The intruder had fled, but he was never caught. The case was still open. My cousin had never thought to warn me because he did not know I would be taking that particular route. When I looked back on everything, I realized that the vehicle which had followed me might have been patrolling from that property, watching the road for potential targets, or it might have been entirely unrelated. I will never know for certain. What I do know is that I have never taken that route again, and I certainly have never driven through that county at night by myself. Some roads teach you lessons through fear, and this one taught me that isolation and darkness can make anyone feel like prey. I was 22 years old when I decided it was time to leave everything behind and start fresh. My hometown had become too small for me, too predictable, and I was ready for something different. The job offer came through in a city about 400 miles away, and I accepted it without much hesitation. It meant independence, new opportunities, and a chance to figure out who I really was outside of the place where I grew up. That morning in early spring, I loaded up my old Honda Civic with everything I owned. My clothes were crammed into 2 suitcases, my books stacked carefully in a cardboard box, and a few pieces of furniture I planned to keep were somehow squeezed into the back seat. The trunk barely closed. My hands were shaking a little as I started the engine around 6 in the morning. The sky was still dark, but the first hints of dawn were starting to creep along the horizon. I was nervous about driving alone for such a long distance, something I had never done before. The road ahead looked endless, and I had no idea what was waiting for me on it. The highway stretched out before me in long, monotonous lines. It was early morning, and there were barely any other cars on the road. The landscape around me shifted from small town buildings to wide open fields and thick forests that seemed to go on forever. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I drove, lost in my own thoughts about the new job, the new apartment, the new life I was about to start. Around 9 in the morning, I decided to stop at a small diner I spotted off the exit. The place was called Ruby's Diner, one of those old-fashioned establishments with red vinyl seats and a long counter. The air inside smelled like coffee and bacon. There were only a few other customers scattered throughout the booths. I ordered a coffee and a breakfast sandwich, then found myself sitting at one of the small tables near the window. I was halfway through my sandwich when I noticed her. She was an older woman, probably in her early 50s, sitting alone in the booth across from me. She had long gray hair that looked like it hadn't been properly cared for in months, and her clothes seemed to hang on her body in an odd way. But what struck me most was the way she was staring at me. Not a glance, not a casual look. A full, unwavering stare that made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore it and focused on my coffee, but I could feel her eyes on me the entire time I was eating. After about 10 minutes, she got up from her booth. My heart started beating a little faster. She walked directly toward the exit, and I watched as she passed right by my table. Then she stopped. She turned back to look at me, and I made the mistake of meeting her gaze. That was when she approached me. She leaned down slightly, her voice low and urgent, and she said something that I would never forget. "You should not take the route past exit 7. Do not go that way. Promise me you will not go that way." Her breath smelled stale, and her eyes were desperate in a way that terrified me. I sat there frozen, not sure what to say. Before I could respond, she straightened up and walked out of the diner without another word. I sat there for a few more minutes, my coffee growing cold in front of me. What did she mean about exit 7? Why would she warn me about it? It made no sense. I finished my coffee slowly, paid the bill, and headed back to my car. The warning echoed in my mind, but I pushed it aside. It was probably just some confused woman. These kinds of things happened all the time. I drove for another 3 hours, watching the landscape become increasingly remote. The towns became smaller and fewer between, and eventually they disappeared altogether. There was nothing but fields on either side of the highway, stretching out to meet the horizon. Occasionally, I would pass a dirt road leading off into the distance, but there were no houses, no signs of civilization. The rain started around noon, light at first but gradually becoming heavier. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, turning the afternoon sky a shade of gray that felt almost ominous. By 12:30, I was hungry and decided to stop at a gas station I saw coming up. It was called Tom's 24-hour, and it was exactly what its name suggested. A small building with a few gas pumps out front and a tiny convenience store inside. I pulled up to one of the pumps and got out of the car. The wind was picking up, carrying the smell of rain and dust. The place felt isolated in a way that made me uncomfortable. There were no other cars in the parking lot, and when I looked around, there was nothing but empty fields and forests stretching out in every direction. I filled up my tank quickly, then went inside to grab something to eat. The man behind the counter was in his early 40s, with a weathered face and tired eyes. He barely acknowledged me as I picked up a sandwich and a bottle of orange juice from the cooler. When I brought my items to the counter, he rang them up without making eye contact or saying a single word. The silence between us felt heavy and unnatural. As he handed me my change, I noticed something strange in his expression. It was almost like pity or maybe concern. Before I could analyze it further, he looked away and busied himself with something under the counter. The whole interaction took less than 3 minutes, but it left me feeling uneasy in a way I could not quite explain. I ate my sandwich quickly while standing by the car, my eyes scanning the empty landscape around me. The rain continued to fall, and the wind had picked up even more. I found myself thinking about the woman at Ruby's diner and her strange warning. I pulled out my phone and opened my Maps app. That was when I decided to look up the exits ahead. I was approaching exit number 6, and just past that would be exit 7, the very exit the woman had warned me about. I still did not understand why she had given me that warning, but as I looked at the map, I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold rain outside. The landscape around me became more and more dense as I drove deeper into the afternoon. Tall trees flanked both sides of the highway, and the sky had grown so dark with clouds that it might as well have been evening instead of the middle of the day. The rain hammered against my windshield, and I had to turn my wipers up to their fastest setting just to see the road ahead. I started to notice the exits more carefully now. Exit 5 came and went. Then, about 40 minutes later, I saw the sign for exit 6. It appeared suddenly in the rain, a green highway sign that seemed to materialize out of the downpour. My heart started beating a little faster. Exit 7 would be coming up soon. As I drove past exit 6, I found myself slowing down slightly. Part of me was curious about what could possibly be so dangerous about exit 7 that it warranted a warning from a complete stranger. Another part of me knew instinctively that I should listen to the warning. I kept thinking about the woman's eyes, the urgency in her voice, the way she had leaned down close to me in that diner. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The rain showed no signs of letting up. My knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. That was when I saw it. A small highway sign appeared in the distance, barely visible through the rain. Exit 7 coming up 1 mile. My stomach dropped. This was it. This was the exit the woman had warned me about. I had a choice to make. I could do what she had said and avoid it, taking some alternate route instead. Or I could proceed as normal and try to understand what the danger actually was. The rational part of my brain kept asking the same question over and over. It was just an exit. How dangerous could a single exit possibly be? But another part of me, something deeper and more primal, was screaming at me to turn around, to find another route, to trust the warning of a stranger who had looked at me with such genuine fear in her eyes. I was so caught up in my own thoughts that I almost missed what happened next. Just past the 1 mile marker, the highway suddenly became darker. I realized that the street lights that had been spaced regularly along the road had disappeared. It happened gradually at first, just 1 or 2 sections where the lights seemed to be out. But as I got closer to the exit, I noticed that there were no lights at all. The stretch of highway leading up to exit 7 was completely dark. I slowed down even more, my eyes straining to see through the rain and the darkness. The trees on both sides of the road seemed to press in closer, creating a tunnel effect. The world outside my car windows had become a blur of gray and black. This was not normal. Something was wrong here. I could feel it in my bones. As I approached the exit ramp itself, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the shoulder of the highway, partially hidden by the darkness and the rain, was an old car. It was completely abandoned, with broken windows and tires that had long since gone flat. The paint was peeling off in long strips, and the interior was so decayed that I could not even tell what color it had originally been. How long had this car been sitting here? Days, weeks, years. I slowed down even more, almost crawling now. My mind was racing. This was not a coincidence. This car being here at this exact location, near this specific exit that I had been warned about. It all felt connected somehow. I kept my eyes on the road, looking for any signs of movement or danger, but the world around me remained empty and still except for the hammering rain. I was about halfway down the ramp leading to exit 7 when I saw her. At first I thought I was hallucinating. A woman was standing on the side of the road, completely soaked from the rain. She was wearing a thin cotton shirt that clung to her body, and her skin looked pale almost to the point of being translucent. She was waving at me frantically, one arm raised above her head in a gesture of distress. Please, her body language seemed to say. Please stop. Every instinct in my body screamed at me not to stop. I eased my foot off the brake but did not completely remove it. The car continued slowly forward, and I kept my eyes locked on her as I passed. She turned to look directly at me as my car went by, and for just a moment our eyes met. There was something deeply wrong about her expression. It was not the normal expression of someone in need of help. It was something else entirely. Something that made my skin prickle and my mouth go dry. I pressed down on the accelerator, forcing my car to pick up speed on the wet exit ramp. When I checked my rearview mirror, my breath caught in my throat. The woman was no longer there. The spot where she had been standing was now completely empty. It was as if she had simply vanished into the darkness and rain. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost lost control of the car as I navigated the turn at the bottom of the exit ramp. By this point, every fiber of my being was telling me that I needed to get away from this place. I needed to get back on the main highway and drive as far as I could from exit 7. The woman at Ruby's diner had been right. Something was deeply wrong with this exit. Something was very wrong. I made it back onto the main highway, my speed increasing more with every passing second. My eyes flicked continuously to my rearview mirror, checking to see if anything was following me. The road ahead was still dark and empty, nothing but the beam of my headlights cutting through the rain and the night that had seemingly fallen instantly. I was driving at nearly 70 miles per hour when I noticed something that made my stomach twist into knots. Another car appeared behind me. It came out of nowhere, materializing in my rearview mirror as if it had simply dropped out of the sky. At first it was just lights in the distance, but within minutes it had gotten much closer. Too close. I was still probably 3 to 4 miles away from exit 7, and this car was now riding only a few car lengths behind me. I pressed down on the accelerator again, pushing my old Honda Civic to speeds it was never meant to travel. The car shuddered slightly under the strain, but it picked up speed. The car behind me sped up as well, maintaining its distance but never falling back. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. Then, without warning, the car behind me swerved into the left lane and pulled up alongside me. I kept my eyes forward, too afraid to look over at the vehicle, but I could see it in my peripheral vision. It was a black sedan, completely nondescript. As I watched, a window rolled down, and then I heard it. A sound, a voice. Something that was almost like a voice but not quite. It was distorted and wrong, and it made my skin crawl. I could not make out actual words, just sounds that seemed to be calling out to me. I did not look over. I kept my eyes on the road ahead and I did not look. Instead, I made a decision. I suddenly slammed on my brakes, dropping my speed from 70 down to 30 in just a few seconds. The black sedan shot past me, nearly clipping my front bumper as it did. For just a fraction of a second, I could see the driver. It was a man, but his face was completely obscured by shadow. And behind him, in the back seat, I could see at least 2 other figures. The black sedan kept going, disappearing into the darkness ahead of me. But now my rearview mirror was filling with more lights, more vehicles. They were coming from behind me, emerging out of the darkness one after another. A red pickup truck, a white van, another sedan. At least 4 or 5 vehicles, all converging on my position from different directions. That was when it hit me. This was not random traffic. This was organized, deliberate. This was exactly what the woman at Ruby's diner had been trying to warn me about. And I had almost driven directly into it. She must have known. She must have seen something in me, some sign that I was about to drive onto this stretch of highway, and she had tried to save my life. I took the next exit I could find, a small off-ramp that led onto a side road. The vehicles that had been pursuing me seemed to slow down and fall back, as if they did not want to follow me onto the smaller roads. Perhaps they only hunted on the main highway. Perhaps they needed the isolation of that dark stretch of road to do whatever it was they were trying to do. But my relief was short-lived. As I navigated the side road, desperately trying to find my way back to civilization, I made a terrible mistake. I took what I thought was a shortcut back to the main highway. Instead, it was a road that looped back around directly to exit 7. Within 5 minutes, I was approaching that dark stretch of road again. This time, I did not hesitate. I saw the entrance to that unlit section of highway, and I slammed on my brakes. I threw the car into reverse and started backing up as fast as I could. That was when the headlights found me. A pickup truck came flying out of the darkness, moving at incredible speed. It pulled directly in front of my car, blocking the road completely. I had perhaps 2 seconds to react. I threw my car into drive and jerked the wheel hard to the left, trying to create an angle that would allow me to get around the pickup truck. That was when all 4 doors of the truck flew open. They came pouring out like ants from a disturbed nest. I counted 4 of them, maybe 5. They were all men, all dressed in dark clothing. Some of them were carrying tools, objects that I recognized as deadly weapons even in the darkness. A sledgehammer, a crowbar, what looked like a piece of metal pipe. For just a moment as they came running toward my car, I locked eyes with the man in front. There was nothing in his face. No emotion, no anger, no joy, just a complete and total emptiness. He looked at me the way someone might look at an insect, with no sense of connection or humanity whatsoever. And in that moment, I understood with absolute clarity that if these men got their hands on me, I would not be going to my new job. I would not be moving into my new apartment. I would not be starting my new life. I had found the darkness that the woman at Ruby's diner had been trying to protect me from. And now, I was going to have to fight for my life to escape it. I did not think. I did not calculate my odds. I simply reacted on pure instinct. I slammed down on the accelerator and yanked the wheel hard to the right. My car lurched forward and to the side, moving at an angle that took it off the road entirely. The first man who had reached my window raised his crowbar and brought it down hard against the glass. The window spider webbed but did not shatter completely. The impact sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through my entire body. I was driving through the muddy shoulder of the road now, my tires kicking up dirt and grass and gravel. Behind me, I could hear the sound of running feet and shouting voices. More vehicles were starting to move. Headlights were coming at me from multiple directions, but I had gotten far enough ahead that I could see an opening, a small farmland road that led off to the east. I cut the wheel hard and drove toward it. My car bounced and jolted as I drove over the uneven ground. More than once I thought I was going to flip, but my grip on the wheel kept me grounded. Behind me, the vehicles were trying to follow, but the smaller cars could not handle the terrain as well as my high-clearance vehicle could. The pickup truck managed to keep pace for a while, but after about half a mile, I could see it falling back in my rearview mirror. I drove like that for what felt like hours but was probably only about 10 minutes. Eventually, the farmland gave way to forest, and the forest eventually opened up onto another larger road. When I finally merged back onto a main highway, I was shaking so badly that I could barely keep my car in a straight line. I drove for another 20 minutes, putting as much distance as I could between myself and that exit. My hands were white from gripping the steering wheel, and tears were streaming down my face. When I finally felt even remotely safe, I pulled off onto the shoulder of the road, and I did something I should have done much earlier. I called 911. The operator was professional and calm, which somehow made everything feel more real. I gave her my location, and I told her what had happened. I did not mention the woman at Ruby's diner or the pale girl on the exit ramp. I did not mention that I had the overwhelming sense that something far darker than a simple carjacking was happening on that stretch of road. I just told her about the men with weapons and the vehicles that had tried to trap me. Police arrived about 30 minutes later. 2 officers pulled up alongside my car, and I shakily relayed what had happened all over again. They listened carefully, asked me questions, took down information. Then they told me something that made all the blood drain from my face. About 2 years prior, a woman had gone missing from that exact area. She had been traveling alone on the same highway, and before her there had been others. Young people traveling alone. All of them had disappeared near that same dark stretch of road marked by Exit 7. The police had never been able to prove anything, never been able to establish a connection, but the pattern was there. As the officer was telling me this, something clicked in my mind. I thought back to the woman at Ruby's diner, how she had known without me telling her that I was about to take that road. The way she had looked at me with such desperate understanding. Had she also been a victim once? Had she managed to escape and spent her life trying to warn others away from the same danger? And the pale girl on the exit ramp. I realized now that she had not been signaling for help. She had been trying to warn me away, just like the woman at the diner. She had been trying to tell me to turn back, to run, to save my own life. I was alive because of 2 strangers who had seen danger approaching and had chosen to intervene. I was alive because someone else had survived this darkness and dedicated themselves to protecting others from it. The police never caught whoever was responsible for what happened on that stretch of road. But I left that state the very next day with a profound understanding of how fragile life really is, and how the smallest acts of kindness can mean the difference between life and death. To this day, I still think about that drive. I still think about the woman at Ruby's diner and the girl on the exit ramp. I think about all the people who are not as lucky as I was. And I tell everyone I know to always trust their instincts, to always listen to the warnings of strangers, and to never, ever ignore that small voice inside that tells you something is deeply wrong.